I've not seen her picture before. I'll be sitting here waiting for the...
I'm leaving, Daniel. I came here to be with you, but I want answers.
I'm thinking this is unsettled.
He is lying to me, and he's trying to make me look insane. I'm getting sick to my stomach. It's making me question more about this woman. What is he hiding about it that he has to lie? You have a contact that says wife, and you lied, and now you're smiling and smirking and acting like you don't care.
Can you stop? Can we be serious?
Lisa did not expose a random secret in that dinner scene. She dropped the one truth that made every earlier promise look unstable in a single breath. The second she admitted she was still married, Daniel stopped looking like a fiancé in a difficult relationship and started looking like a man recalculating everything in real time. You could feel the air change, because this was no longer about romance, hurt feelings, or culture clash. This was about trust, paperwork, public embarrassment, and who had been making decisions without the full story. Welcome back. I'm Sabreen Rose, and if you end up feeling strongly about who crossed the bigger line here, subscribe and stay with me. Because this is the kind of 90-day fiancé mess that says more the longer you sit with it. What makes this moment hit so hard is not only the confession itself, it is the timing. By the time Lisa says it out loud, the relationship has already been pushed through commitment language, future planning, and emotional pressure. That changes the meaning of the reveal. Daniel is not only hearing that she is still legally tied to someone else, he is hearing that he has been moving forward on partial information while being asked to treat the relationship like a serious future. And to be fair, there is more than one way to read Lisa here. One reading says she was scared, ashamed, and kept delaying a truth that got harder to say with time. The other reading is harsher. She did not tell him earlier because the longer she waited, the more invested he became. That is where the whole thing stops feeling like a struggling romance and starts looking like an arrangement held together by selective honesty. Then, the bigger question lands right on top of the confession. Was Daniel shocked because his heart got hit? Or because the structure holding this relationship together suddenly looked legally and emotionally shaky? And if Lisa knew this before things got serious, why say it only after the bond was already deep enough to make walking away harder? The confession hit hard because the relationship was already carrying strain long before that dinner table froze over. By then, viewers had already watched Lisa move through a relationship where fitting in did not look simple, easy, or mutual. There was pressure around how she should present herself, how she should respond, how she should adapt, and how quickly she should prove respect in Daniel's world. On the most generous reading, that is part of cross-cultural dating. People bring habits, pride, family standards, and expectations. Not every uncomfortable moment is manipulation. But the colder reading is harder to ignore once you line the scenes up. And moment after moment, the burden seemed to fall heavier on Lisa to prove sincerity, patience, and commitment, while Daniel often stayed in the stronger position, the one setting the tone, correcting, instructing, or quietly evaluating. That does not prove bad intent by itself. What it does show is an imbalance in who had to perform love out loud and who got to measure it. The same split exists on Lisa's side. A fair reading says she wanted acceptance so badly that she kept smoothing over parts of herself she feared would blow the relationship up. That is messy, but human. The harsher reading is that she kept editing the truth because each delay bought her more time, more emotional investment, and more momentum toward the future she wanted. In my opinion, that is why the later confession lands like a bomb instead of a mistake. It does not arrive in a healthy relationship. It arrives in one where the foundation already looks shaky. And that is the pattern that matters. The issue was never only one legal secret. It was a bond already shaped by adjustment pressure, emotional strain, and uneven proof of devotion. Once a relationship starts feeling like one person is being tested while the other is still being assessed, every later reveal gets darker. By the time the marriage truth came out, the bigger question was no longer who lied first, but whether shame had already entered the relationship long before the confession made it impossible to ignore. This is where the story stops being about one bad moment and starts being about what weakness does to a relationship when both people are already under pressure. The incident itself was humiliating, yes, but the bigger issue was not the accident. The bigger issue was the shift that followed. Once one partner is seen at their most exposed, scared, and out of control, the relationship either softens or it changes shape. And on this show, shape matters. To Daniel's credit, he did not explode in the moment. He stayed calm, kept things moving, and did not publicly shame Lisa right there. A generous reading says that was maturity. A harsher reading says calm can still carry power when one person is already too embarrassed to stand on equal ground. In my opinion, that is why this scene matters. Not because of the bodily detail, and not because shock sells, but because vulnerability has consequences. After that, Lisa was no longer moving through the relationship from a stable position. She had been seen at her lowest, and both of them knew it. Then the next day arrives, and that is where the emotional math gets colder. If Daniel was simply being patient under pressure, the relationship still had a chance to feel mutual. If Lisa was already working from a place of shame, then every request, correction, and expectation after that carried extra weight. What might have looked normal before now starts reading differently. A cooking lesson feels less like bonding and more like performance. Cultural adjustment feels less like effort and more like proving worth. The whole mood changes because humiliation rarely stays contained. It leaks into tone, into posture, into who gets to speak with confidence and who starts trying not to make the next mistake. And reality TV makes all of this worse. Private embarrassment does not stay private once cameras, producers, and viewers get involved. The relationship now has to survive two different pressures at once. First, the event itself. Second, the meaning attached to it after everyone has seen it. Once a couple starts carrying both, even ordinary moments begin to feel loaded. To be fair, cross-cultural relationships do ask both people to stretch. Food, dress, family norms, gender expectations, public manners, all of that can feel awkward before it feels familiar. So on the most reasonable reading, Daniel asking Lisa to take part in his customs was not automatically cruel or controlling. Some of those moments fit the usual pattern of one partner trying to bring the other into their world. Discomfort alone is not proof of mistreatment. Sometimes people look clumsy on camera because they are learning in public, and learning in public is brutal. But this is where timing changes everything. By the point Lisa was being pushed through cooking lessons, appearance expectations, and those little signals of what a proper wife should look like, she did not seem emotionally steady or equal in the dynamic. That is why the same scene can land in two different ways. In a healthy bond, cultural guidance feels like sharing. In a strained bond, the exact same guidance starts feeling like grading. The issue stops being the custom itself and becomes who has the power to define respect. And that is where this story gets sharper. Daniel was not only representing culture in those moments, he was also, intentionally or not, setting the standard Lisa had to meet if she wanted approval, peace, and progress. That creates pressure. Suddenly, the question is no longer whether she respects his background. The question becomes whether respect is being used as a sincere value or as a test she has to keep passing. Once that shift happens, every wig adjustment, every correction, every lesson starts to feel less like connection and more like performance under supervision. That is why viewers stay stuck on these scenes. They are not only watching someone try to fit into a partner's world, they are watching someone try to figure out whether fitting in is enough to stay safe in the relationship. And those are two completely different emotional positions. So by the end of this stretch, the real question is not whether Lisa was trying. The real question is whether she was trying to belong or trying not to lose her place. By this point, the story stops being about one confession and starts being about awareness. Not who lied, because both people were clearly operating with incomplete honesty, but who understood the arrangement earlier and handled it better. Lisa reads as messy because her choices burst out in public. Her fear shows. Her timing looks bad. Her panic is visible. She seems like the person losing control of the narrative in real time. Daniel reads the opposite way. He stays quieter, more contained, more watchful. And on reality TV, the calmer person often gets treated like the cleaner person, even when calm is doing a lot of strategic work. So there are two competing reads here, and both deserve airtime. One says Daniel was sincere, patient, and trying to make the relationship work until Lisa finally revealed something too big to absorb. In that version, he did not play a game. He reached a limit. The other reading is colder. He tolerated discomfort, confusion, and humiliation because the arrangement still seemed worth it, then shifted into moral outrage once the arrangement became harder to defend. That does not prove manipulation, but it does raise the question of whether his patience was emotional or transactional. Lisa has the same split. One reading says she was scared, ashamed, and kept delaying the truth because she knew the truth might end everything. That is reckless, but human. The harsher reading is that she gave information in pieces because concealment works best when the other person is already invested. By the time she confessed, the bond had enough momentum to make walking away more painful. That is why this becomes the psychological midpoint. The audience stops asking who made the bigger mistake and starts asking who saw the board sooner. Lisa may have been the louder liar, the more visible liar, the easier liar to blame. But relationships like this are not always tilted by the person making the most noise. Sometimes the messiest person is only the easiest one to spot. Sometimes the quieter person is the one holding more cards. Now the story turns colder. Because the main question is no longer whether Lisa and Daniel loved each other, or even whether they should split. The uglier question is why people stay once trust has already been damaged in plain sight. And the answer is rarely romance by itself. By this stage, shame is involved, time is involved, fantasy is involved, public exposure is involved. The future they already talked themselves into is involved. Once all of that stacks up, leaving does not feel like freedom. Leaving starts to feel like admitting the whole thing cost too much and led nowhere. That is why relationships like this drag on longer than outsiders expect. Walking away means facing the full bill at once. The emotional bill, the public bill, the ego bill, the practical bill. Staying delays that pain, even when staying creates a different kind of pain. So both people get pulled into a trap where the relationship is no longer making them feel safe, but ending it would force them to admit what they were protecting was already broken. And this is where the audience starts feeling something heavier than shock. You stop watching for the reveal and start watching for the decision neither person wants to make first. Because once a bond becomes this damaged, even silence turns into strategy. One person waits for the other to crack. One person hopes the next conversation will hurt less than the last one. Nobody looks strong anymore. Nobody looks innocent either. So by the time this stretch settles, the romance angle is almost irrelevant. What you are left with is two people standing inside the wreckage of a bond they both invested in for different reasons. Both staring at the cost, both seeing the damage, and neither one ready to make the clean move that would finally end it. This is the point where the audience usually gets lazy. You see one person cry, one person go cold, one person confess late, one person react hard, and your brain wants a neat answer. Villain there, victim here, case closed. Reality TV loves that instinct because clean judgment keeps people watching and commenting like they were seated on a jury with full evidence, when most of the time they are reacting to a cut, a pause, a look, and a soundtrack doing half the work. And to be fair, both Lisa and Daniel give viewers enough material to judge. Lisa's timing looks terrible. Hiding a legal marriage until the relationship is already deep makes her look deceptive, reactive, and willing to speak only when concealment gets harder. Daniel's response gives you the opposite kind of suspicion. He looks controlled enough that every moral word out of his mouth starts sounding like strategy to some viewers. So the easy version is tempting. She manipulated with delay, he manipulated with restraint. But the easy version is not always the honest one. A late confession can come from fear, denial, shame, or calculated timing. A hard reaction can come from moral disgust, wounded pride, fear about consequences, or all three landing at once. That is what reality TV flattens. It rewards certainty even when the human truth is mixed. People start treating body language like proof and editing like access to motive when neither one gives the full story. So yes, roast the behavior. Lisa gave partial truth when full truth was owed. Daniel's calm often felt less comforting than watchful, but stronger judgment asks a tougher question than who lied worse or who looked guiltier in the moment. If both of them were using selective truth in different ways, then the more interesting issue is not who played dirty. It is who was more trapped by the arrangement and who was better at hiding how trapped they already were. By now, the pattern is hard to ignore. The public embarrassment was never only about one humiliating event. The private calculation was never only about one bad reaction. The cultural pressure was never only about tradition. The delayed truth was never only one confession made too late. Piece by piece, all of these moments started feeding the same conclusion. This relationship did not crack in one scene. It was carrying damage for a while, and the reveal simply made that damage impossible to dress up as romance anymore. That is why the earlier moments matter more on the way out than they did on the way in. The awkward discomfort stops looking random. The repeated pressure to adapt stops feeling minor. The difference between care and endurance becomes much harder to ignore. One person seemed to need acceptance so badly that honesty kept getting postponed. The other seemed willing to tolerate more than most people would, but tolerance is not the same as tenderness. And on a show like this, the gap between what gets said for cameras and what timing suggests off camera can tell you more than any big emotional speech. So the clearest reading is not that one dinner destroyed everything. The clearer reading is that the dinner forced both of them to stand inside the truth of what had already been building. Selective empathy, uneven power, performance under pressure, future promises tied to practical stakes, and hanging over all of it, the America question not as a side issue, but as the thing that made every compromise feel heavier and every motive look less clean. That is the payoff. Not shock, clarity. The bond looked romantic from a distance, but up close it kept asking the same ugly question. Was this care, or was this endurance with a goal attached to it? And even after all the shame, all the pressure, and all the exposed weakness, one mystery still lingers over both of them. What was the one thing each of them still wanted badly enough to keep standing there? So where does all of this land? Not in some clean hero versus villain ending, and not in a romance that simply got unlucky. What viewers saw was a relationship where both people kept moving toward a reward while acting like the emotional bill was still manageable. Lisa hid facts that should have been said much earlier. Daniel kept absorbing discomfort in a way that started to feel less like devotion and more like leverage. She cracked in public. He stayed controlled until control no longer helped him. And once both of those truths were visible at the same time, the relationship stopped looking loving and started looking negotiated. That is why bonds like this often last longer than outsiders expect. People do not stay only because they feel attached. They stay because they have already spent too much, explained too much, tolerated too much, and pictured too much of the future to walk away cleanly. Fear keeps them there. Delay keeps them there. Pride keeps them there. And every time the truth gets edited instead of faced, the next crisis arrives carrying all the weight of the last one too. That is the real takeaway from this whole mess. When a relationship starts running on selective honesty, emotional management, and quiet fear of what the full truth will cost, the problem does not stay small. The pressure stacks. The trust thins out. The next reveal hits harder because the ground underneath was already weak. And that leaves one last question hanging over Daniel, over Lisa, and over everything that came after. When he reacted the way he did, was that a man whose heart finally broke? Or a man whose strategy suddenly stopped working?